Hello everybody, this is Caitlin with Mr. Ron LeGrand. How are you doing today, Ron?
I'm excellent. Happy almost Memorial Day, everybody.
It is. Are you ready for today's Ask Ron questions?
I guess so.
Okay. Our first two come from Jude Kiguli of North Carolina.
I'm sure you massacred that name, right? Sorry.
It could have been.
Okay.
I keep hearing that when you do a wraparound mortgage, that it gives buyers a chance to get another loan. How is this different from subject to, and does a wraparound take the loan off the seller's credit?
Well, those are three good questions. Number one, a wraparound mortgage means a mortgage is created from your land trust to the seller that wraps around the underlying debt. It does not remove the debt from the seller's credit. In the pretty house business, if you're buying on terms, you cannot remove the debt from the seller's credit because it's not going to get paid off until your buyer goes and qualifies for a new loan and pays everybody off sometime in the future. How's it different from subject to? That's a question I deal with all the time in my training. A wraparound mortgage means I'm paying the seller or paying their bank, but they have evidence to prove that they're receiving an incoming payment big enough to at least offset their outgoing payment. Therefore, they don't have a debt to income ratio because they're collecting as much as they're paying, so it doesn't go negative on their debt ratio. Now, don't ever tell anybody that you can guarantee them that will happen because that is entirely up to the bank that they're applying for, or to, if they want to go get another loan. And sometimes the bank wants to have the season for several months or a year before they'll allow it. So be careful what comes out of your mouth, but that's the answer. Now, on a subject to, if I just take over their debt, which is what it means, I don't owe the seller anything when I'm buying subject to. I just owe their bank. Remember now, that's not personal liability on my part because I'm never going to be personal liable on a loan on a house. But I've agreed orally to make the payment on their loan until it's paid off. But I'm not under any legal liability to do so, and that loan does not show on my credit report just because I decided to start making the payments on it. So on a subject to, the seller has no recourse if I don't pay. On a wraparound mortgage, they do, because they can foreclose on the mortgage that I owe them. On a subject to, I don't owe them anything. I owe their bank, so they don't have any way to foreclose. But more importantly, to your question, if they want to go qualify for another loan, that might not happen because the debt that I'm paying for them is going to go against their outgoing debt and probably kill their debt ratio. So I buy on a wraparound mortgage a lot just for that reason, because I feel like the seller is going to go get another loan sometime in the future.
And that was his next question, was about how he recently had a buyer who wants to do the owner financing but wants to get another loan.
You mean the seller, okay?
Yeah, seller.
Yeah. Well, remember, tell them that's the way that it should work, but don't make them guarantee to that effect.
Okay. And then on his next question, he said, what happens if the seller has accepted terms but you do not have the closing cost or even the money to make the monthly payment? Do you still put them on contract, or do you wait until you get a buyer?
The answer is yes and no. Okay. If I don't have the money for closing cost, or I'm worried about the payments, you probably need to bring in someone else. Now, this is assuming you would close right now. Some deals I want to close as fast as I can because I got the money for closing costs. Some deals I don't because I'm not sure it's a deal yet until I find my tenant buyer. If I'm doing number two, where I'm not ready to close till I find my tenant buyer, and that has clearly been disclosed to the seller and they're okay with it, then there are no closing costs, so there's no money to come up with. If I'm doing a deal that I want to close and I don't have the closing costs, because I'm telling you, most of them, I want to go close them as soon as I can to protect them, make sure that something doesn't happen, then I'll just go to someplace, somebody I know, and work out a deal to borrow the closing cost. And no, that is not giving up half the profits for borrowing the lousy closing cost. You might want to offer them, if you'll put up the closing cost and be responsible for any payment that I make until I get a tenant buyer in the house, then I'll pay you back all your money plus 15-20% of that amount when I put a tenant buyer in there and collect that big down payment. And if you structure it right, you shouldn't even have a payment for at least 2 months after you take title to the house.
Awesome. Okay, our next one is from Matthew Jensen of Arizona.
Matt.
I relocated here in East Valley, Phoenix metro area, and I'm having a terrible time finding an attorney. I've called dozens. Do you have any idea how I can find some in this area?
Well, okay, you got some big gaps in your question. You called dozens, but that doesn't mean you said the right stuff. First thing I would do is ask other investors if you know any. If you don't, you might want to ask some realtors if they know investor-friendly attorneys. But you can always go on Google and I want a real estate attorney in whatever city you're in. A real estate closing attorney, sorry, because there is a difference. Real estate closing attorney, whatever city you're in. Then you pick up the phone and you call that firm. You do not have to even talk to the attorney. You can talk to the legal beagle in the building that does all the work for the attorney anyway, and ask them this: are you a real estate closing company? In other words, is that what you do a lot of? And if the answer is yes, well then all you got to say is, listen, I buy properties, and I'm going to need a closing attorney. Sometimes I buy them subject to, sometimes I buy them with owner financing, and I usually install lease option tenant buyers in them, and I want you on both sides. Is that what you do? And if they say, yeah, we do it all the time, then you've probably found your attorney. Then the next thing you would do is probably negotiate a fixed cost, regardless of what kind of closing it is. Mine is $400 with my attorney. And then maybe once you get past all of that, if you like what you hear, I wouldn't even bother going to see the attorney until I actually get a contract. Then you go meet them, get to know each other, and then go ahead and give them the contract to start the closing process. And you won't make very many of those calls if you call the right attorney to begin with. And look, all else fails, use a title company until you can find an attorney. But I want you to get an attorney as soon as possible. Now, the Wolves live in Arizona. You might want to contact them and see if they can refer you to one that you could use. But your closing attorney now needs to be where you're selling houses, because your tenant buyer has to go sit in front of that attorney when you hand them the keys and put them in the house. Seller can be anywhere because it's all done electronically.
Okay. Our next one's from Ron Pivola of New Jersey. I'm forming an LLC here in New Jersey. I had to apply for an EIN number before forming the LLC. I registered the EIN number under a 2-member LLC. I plan on making the other member just a 1% partner when forming the LLC. There is a section that asks for what type of business you are forming an LLC, LLP, LP, etc., which I imagine I will be using LLP. When I form the EIN number and the company name, I use LLC in the title. So do I have to go back and cancel the EIN number and register for LLP? No,
you're getting an LLC, not an LLP, and it really doesn't make much difference what you tell them the use of it is, but you could just say general purposes to make it simple. But back to the attorney question, you see where you live, you have to have an attorney. You can't close with a title company. Same with New York. So that's a good thing as far as I'm concerned. You've got to go find a closing attorney.
Okay.
All right.
Awesome. Next one's from Barry Myers of Florida.
Barry.
Get the deed is mentioned several times in your publications. I do not understand what good it does to get the deed. I do not know anything that can be done with an existing deed. I do not think that it can be endorsed, such as we do with a check. Or do you mean we are supposed to get a new warranty deed?
Barry, you're correct. Frankly, it's internal slang. When you buy a car, they got to bring the original title, and they got to sign it. Don't work that way in real estate. In real estate, every time you buy a house, a new deed is created by your attorney. Here's, a deed looks like this. It's white paper with black ink on it. Okay, so your seller has got to sign a new deed, which we use a warranty deed to trustee, and when that deed is handed to you or your attorney, you now own the house. And the seller is the only one that signs on the deed other than the notary. So getting the deed is just internal slang for buying the house for what's owed on it, for the most part. You don't actually get the original deed. You're correct. It's recorded on public record. Nobody has to produce the original document. But if you don't get the deed, you're not buying the house. So they have to deed the house to your land trust or to you for you to be able to buy the house.
Okay.
That's the first time I've had that question. I address it every time I do a training, but it is slang that nobody understands.
Gotcha. Okay, our next one's from Rebecca Gilliam of Georgia.
Rebecca.
I know a nice property that is going to be on the market next week. The property is in a nice area, and someone just up the road sold for $420,000 without all the extras this one has. So question, how do I find an interested buyer before then?
You don't. Because, Rebecca, you cannot be looking for a buyer until you have a house under contract. We don't do that. That's called being a realtor without a license. That's called breaking the law. You must have a contract to buy or lease with an option on that property before you go looking for a buyer. Secondly, you said it's going on the market. I don't know what that means, because if it's going to be listed, you're wasting your time and energy on it. You're not buying that house. And if it's that nice a house, you're probably not buying it anyway. Remember, when we buy houses, the seller has to have a problem, or the house has to have a problem, or both. And now that don't have to be a big problem, but you have no idea from what I'm hearing what the deal is on this house. So step one is, if it's not listed, is to contact the seller and get a property information sheet filled out on it. And then go to my $1 million script and find out if there's any interest at all on the other side of them taking terms. Because if they're not interested in terms, you're done. No terms, no deal. Repeat that after me, Rebecca. No terms, no deal. So quit chasing rainbows. Get PI sheet filled out, and you'll immediately know whether it's a deal or not once you make that simple closing call.
Awesome. Perfect. Our next one is from Steven Sellers of Texas.
Steven.
Does the attorney disperse the money owed, and does he or she take their fee out of our option
Yes.
fee?
Any fees that are paid to the attorney usually come right out of the money as it comes to the closing table, and you get a check for whatever is different. Yes. Now, a lot of people flip houses and pick up a check from the buyer, but that's only for a deposit. They still get the rest of their check at closing, and the attorney writes it out of their account. Correct. So let's say you got somebody that you're working with. I'd have the attorney put their fee, their partner fee, or their consulting fee, or whatever, right on the closing statement, and let the attorney write them the check.
Perfect. Okay. Our next one is from Marc Savage of Florida.
Marc Savage. How you doing, Marc?
I've had a number of sellers ask me for some sort of option deposit when doing a lease option purchase. When, if ever, would you consider giving someone an option deposit?
All right, here's how it works, Marc. Option deposit. Okay, so they want a deposit from you to option the property from them on a lease purchase. Is that what I'm hearing? Probably so. Marc, you'll take a look at your lease purchase agreement that I furnished you. You'll find there's no place on there for an earnest money deposit. And here's why. When you walk out of that house with that agreement signed, you're done. There is no closing. You've just closed it. At least you've closed the right to buy it with a lease with an option to buy. You don't then go to an attorney. You only go to the attorney after you find a tenant buyer and you want to install a tenant buyer in it. Then you have the attorney contact the seller and get your CYA letter signed, anything else he wants signed, and that's done electronically. Then he installs your tenant buyer at the same time. But as far as an option deposit, think about it. Wouldn't it be normal when you're renting a house to get a deposit? Yes, well, that's what they're thinking. So if they're asking for a deposit and it's a small deposit, I wouldn't mind giving it to them, but that's what it takes to do the deal. But if they're looking for a multi-$1,000 deposit, you just got to tell them that won't work for us. We buy houses with nothing down, and then how close to nothing you can get if they won't buy that. I hear a noise out there. It sounds like the wolves have entered the building. All right.
We have one more question.
Good.
Okay. Our last question is from Bill Morgan of Mississippi.
Uh-huh.
On the agreement and declaration of trust where it says the name of the trust is, what do you name it?
You don't have to have a name. I just use the trustee's name anyway. ABC LLC as trustee, that's the only name I ever use. It frankly does not make any difference what name you use. Call it the Mickey Mouse Trust if you want. It's totally irrelevant.
Awesome. Okay, that was all.
Okay, that's
all
it.
for today.
All right. See you guys next week, same time, same channel. Go out there and get some deals done. And I'll hope to see you in person pretty soon.